the Arabian Peninsula, a vast expanse of desert, mountains, and coastlines that would one day become the birthplace of one of history's most influential religions. But what came before? Who were the people that called this harsh landscape home in the centuries before Islam transformed the region forever? For too long, this period has been dismissed as the Age of Ignorance, Jahiliyyah, as later Islamic scholars would call it. But the truth is far more complex, more fascinating, and more human. Here, between the shadows of empires, Persian to the east, Byzantine to the north, Abyssinian to the west, ancient Arabia developed its own distinct character, a mosaic of tribes, traditions, and beliefs shaped by the unforgiving desert and the lucrative trade routes that crossed it. The year is 500 CE. If we could soar above the peninsula like the desert eagles, we would see a land of stark contrasts. To the north lie fertile oases, dotted with date palms and small settlements. The western coast, the Hijaz, is a mountainous barrier separating the interior from the Red Sea. In the south, ancient kingdoms have risen and fallen, blessed by monsoon rains that transform valleys into green paradises. And at the heart of it all, the vast empty quarter, Rub al-Khali, a sea of sand larger than France, where few dare to venture. In this world, survival meant adaptation. The Bedouin nomads moved with their herds according to the rhythm of the seasons, following ancient paths to water and grazing land. Their knowledge of the desert's secrets passed down through generations in poetry and song. For them, the tribe, the Kabila, was everything: protection, identity, life itself. But Arabia was not only nomadic. Towns and cities grew at strategic points along the trade networks that connected India and China to the Mediterranean world. Frankincense and myrrh, spices and silks, gold and ivory, all passed through Arabian hands. The most important of these settlements was Mecca, nestled in a barren valley surrounded by hills. At its center stood the Kaaba, a cubic shrine housing hundreds of tribal deities. This sanctuary made Mecca not just a commercial hub, but a religious one, a place where warring tribes could meet in peace during sacred months. The Quraysh tribe controlled this vital crossroads, leveraging their position to amass wealth and influence. Through strategic alliances and marriages, they built a merchant aristocracy that would shape the destiny of Arabia. Religion in pre-Islamic Arabia was a complex tapestry. Most Arabs were polytheists, worshipping a multitude of deities associated with celestial bodies, natural phenomena, and tribal ancestors. Al-Lat, Al-Uzza, and Manat, three goddesses, were particularly revered as the daughters of Allah, a remote high god who created the world but took little interest in human affairs. Each tribe had its own patron deity, represented by stone idols or beetles, sacred stones believed to house divine spirits. Rituals of sacrifice, divination, and pilgrimage bound communities together under the watchful eyes of soothsayers and priestesses who interpreted the will of the gods. Yet monotheism was not unknown. Jewish communities had long established themselves in oasis settlements like Yathrib, later Medina, and Khaybar. Christian monasteries dotted the northern frontiers, while Nestorian missionaries traveled the trade routes. In the south, the kingdom of Himyar had even adopted Judaism as its state religion before falling to Christian Abyssinian forces. Between these faiths existed the Hanifs, those who rejected idolatry in favor of a pure monotheism that predated organized religion. They claimed to follow the ancient faith of Abraham, whom Arabs considered their ancestor through his son Ishmael. This religious diversity reflected a fundamental truth about pre-Islamic Arabia. It was never isolated from the wider world, despite the protective barriers of desert and sea. Rather, it stood at a cultural crossroads where ideas and beliefs flowed freely, creating a uniquely Arabian synthesis. As night falls over the peninsula, campfires flicker across the landscape. Around them, tribal elders share the day's news, settle disputes, and recite poetry that will outlive them by centuries. They could not know that within 100 years, everything about their world would change forever. But to understand that transformation, we must first understand what came before, a civilization far from ignorant, with its own sophisticated codes of honor, artistic achievements, and spiritual yearnings. The heartbeat of pre-Islamic Arabian society was the tribe, an intricate social structure that determined everything from an individual's identity to their chances of survival. To be without tribal affiliation in this harsh environment was akin to a death sentence, for it meant no protection, no support, and no blood avengers to deter potential attackers. Each tribe traced its lineage to a legendary ancestor, creating elaborate genealogies that stretched back generations. These family trees weren't merely historical records, they were living documents that determined alliances, rivalries, and one's place in the social hierarchy. At the head of each tribe sat the sheikh, not a king with absolute authority, but a first among equals selected for wisdom, generosity, and diplomatic skill. Around him gathered the majlis, a council of respected elders who debated matters of war and peace. Decisions required consensus rather than coercion, making pre-Islamic Arabian governance surprisingly consultative despite its patriarchal structure. The concept of honor, muruwa, governed all aspects of tribal life. For men, this meant displaying courage in battle, generosity to guests, eloquence in speech, and unwavering loyalty to kin. A man's honor was tied to that of his female relatives, whose chastity and dignity he was expected to defend at all costs. Women in pre-Islamic Arabia occupied a complex position. Their status varied widely between sedentary communities and nomadic tribes, between rich trading families and poorer pastoral groups. While patriarchal values predominated, women could own property, conduct business, and in some cases choose their husbands. Poetry of the era celebrates women of remarkable character who wielded considerable influence within their social spheres. Yet dangerous customs also existed. Female infanticide, the burying of unwanted baby girls alive, was practiced among some tribes facing extreme poverty or fearing the shame of daughters captured by enemies. This practice, along with unrestricted polygamy and inheritance customs that disadvantaged women, would later be directly addressed by Islamic reforms. The economic foundation of tribal life varied by geography. Bedouin nomads relied primarily on their camels and small livestock, moving seasonally between grazing lands. These ships of the desert provided milk, meat, wool, and transportation, making them precious beyond measure. Camel raids between rival tribes became ritualized expressions of martial prowess, governed by strict codes that minimized bloodshed while maximizing glory. In agricultural settlements, date palms provided the staple food, supplemented by barley, wheat, and vegetables in areas with sufficient water. But agriculture alone couldn't sustain Arabian society. Trade formed the essential link between scattered communities. Twice yearly, great caravans would depart from southern Arabia laden with frankincense, myrrh, and goods from India and East Africa. Their journey north took them through a network of market towns where local products, leather goods, dates, textiles, would be exchanged alongside poetry, news, and ideas. These commercial hubs became cosmopolitan centers where Arabs encountered Persian merchants, Abyssinian slaves, Byzantine diplomats, and wandering scholars. The need to protect these valuable trade routes drove tribes to form larger confederations. The Quraysh of Mecca exemplified this approach, creating a system of ilaf, mutual protection pacts that ensured safe passage for caravans through territories of allied tribes. This commercial network transformed Mecca from a remote sanctuary to a wealthy entrepot connecting Yemen to Syria and beyond. Beyond economics and politics lay the true glory of pre-Islamic Arabia, its rich cultural traditions. Oral poetry reached its zenith during this period, celebrated in famous competitions held during seasonal fairs. The poets were the celebrities of their age, their words memorized, repeated, and revered for their technical brilliance and emotional power. The qasida, or ode, followed a strict metrical pattern and typically began with the poet standing at an abandoned campsite, remembering a lost love. From this nostalgic opening, it would transition to descriptions of the poet's journey through the desert, culminating in praise for his tribe or patron. These poems weren't merely entertainment, they were repositories of tribal history, ethical values, and practical knowledge about survival in the harsh environment. So sophisticated was this poetic tradition that 7 of the greatest compositions, the mu'allaqat or the suspended ones, were reportedly embroidered in gold and hung upon the Kaaba itself. Their creators became immortalized as the voices of their age, capturing the essence of a society poised between ancient traditions and the winds of change that would soon sweep across the peninsula. As day turns to night in the Arabian Dahot, the spiritual landscape of pre-Islamic Arabia was far more diverse and sophisticated than commonly understood. While later Muslim historians would emphasize the ignorance and superstition of the Jahiliyyah period, archaeological evidence and contemporary accounts reveal a rich tapestry of religious beliefs, practices, and institutions that reflected Arabia's position at the crossroads of ancient civilizations. At first glance, Arabian polytheism appears as a bewildering array of local cults. Each tribe had its patron deity, each region its sacred spaces. Stone idols and wooden statues filled the Kaaba in Mecca, where pilgrims circumambulated barefoot and reverent. But beneath this apparent chaos lay an organized system with its own internal logic. The pre-Islamic pantheon was hierarchical. At its summit stood Allah, not yet the exclusive deity of monotheism, but recognized as the supreme creator God who stood above all others. Below him were ranked various celestial deities associated with the sun, moon, and stars. Among these, a triad of goddesses held special prominence: Al-Lat, the sun goddess, Al-Uzza, associated with Venus, and Manat, who governed fate and time. These daughters of Allah received devotion across tribal boundaries. Worship took many forms. Sacrificial offerings of animals, crops, and precious goods were made to secure divine favor. Pilgrimage to sacred sites, not just the Kaaba but numerous local shrines across the peninsula, marked the rhythm of the religious calendar. Divination through arrows, birds, and dreams helped believers navigate life's uncertainties by glimpsing divine will. Religious specialists served as intermediaries between humans and gods. Kahin, soothsayers, interpreted omens and delivered oracular pronouncements in rhythmic, rhyming prose believed to be inspired by spirits. Shair, poets, were thought to be possessed by jinn, supernatural beings who granted them access to hidden knowledge. These figures wielded considerable influence, their pronouncements capable of launching or preventing tribal conflicts. The jinn themselves formed a parallel society in Arabian cosmology, beings of smokeless fire who could be benevolent or malicious, who inhabited the wilderness, and who sometimes attached themselves to humans. Tales of jinn interacting with mortals filled the night air around campfires, explaining misfortunes, diseases, and strange occurrences in an uncertain world. Monotheistic traditions had also established firm roots in Arabia long before Islam. Jewish communities flourished in agricultural settlements across the Hijaz, particularly in Yathrib, later Medina, Khaybar, and Taima. These communities maintained their distinctive practices while engaging in commerce and occasional intermarriage with their Arab neighbors, spreading knowledge of their scriptures and prophecies. Christianity reached Arabia through multiple channels. The Ghassanids of northern Arabia served as Byzantine allies and adopted Orthodox Christianity. In the east, the Lakhmids were influenced by the Nestorian Christian tradition of Persia. Monastic communities appeared in the Syrian desert, while Christian merchants traveled the trade routes. In Yemen, Abyssinian rule brought monotheistic Christianity as the official religion for a time. Between polytheism and revealed religion stood the enigmatic Hanifs, monotheists who rejected both idolatry and organized religion in favor of what they considered the original faith of Abraham. They practiced meditation in mountain caves, gave generously to the poor, and abstained from practices they deemed corrupted by polytheism. Though few in number, these independent seekers represented a spiritual restlessness within Arabian society. The sacred geography of Arabia centered on the Kaaba, a cube-shaped sanctuary in Mecca traditionally associated with Abraham and his son Ishmael. According to legend, they rebuilt this shrine on divine instructions at the site where Adam had first established a house of worship. The black stone set in its eastern corner was especially venerated, possibly a meteorite that physically connected heaven and earth. Around the Kaaba extended the Haram, a sacred precinct where fighting was forbidden. This sanctuary principle extended to certain sacred months when conflicts were suspended, allowing for pilgrimage and trade fairs that brought together otherwise hostile tribes. The Quraysh, as custodians of the sanctuary, derived both wealth and prestige from their religious role. Religious practices were deeply integrated with social and economic life. Market fairs coincided with pilgrimage seasons. Poetic competitions had spiritual dimensions. Tribal gatherings featured both commerce and ritual. The boundary between sacred and secular remained fluid in a society where supernatural forces were believed to influence every aspect of human experience. As twilight gives way to darkness over an Arabian settlement, while tribal confederations dominated Central Arabia, the periphery of the peninsula saw the rise and fall of sophisticated kingdoms that rivaled their contemporaries across the ancient world. These forgotten states, their monuments half buried in desert sands, their achievements overshadowed by what came after, reveal an Arabia far more connected and complex than commonly portrayed. In the fertile highlands of Yemen, blessed by seasonal monsoon rains, the kingdom of Sheba, flourished from the 8th century BCE. The Sabaeans transformed their mountainous homeland through extraordinary feats of engineering. The Marib Dam, one of the ancient world's technological marvels, stored floodwaters from seasonal rains, supporting irrigation networks that turned valleys into gardens. Sabaean rulers styled themselves as Mukarib, unifiers who brought together priest and king functions. From their capital at Marib, they controlled the lucrative frankincense and myrrh trade, aromatic resins used in temples and palaces throughout the Mediterranean world. Their wealth financed monumental architecture, temples with soaring columns, palaces adorned with alabaster, and sophisticated water systems that sustained urban populations. Inscriptions in the distinctive South Arabian script document a society with established legal codes, bureaucracy, and religious institutions centered on astral deities. The moon god Al-Makka received particular devotion at the Awam Temple, where pilgrims left bronze offerings and stone inscriptions imploring divine favor. The Queen of Sheba, whose legendary visit to King Solomon appears in Jewish, Christian, and later Islamic traditions, likely represents the diplomatic and commercial connections between Saba and its northern neighbors. Archaeological evidence confirms extensive trade networks linking South Arabia to Mesopotamia, the Levant, and even the Greco-Roman world. As Saba declined, other South Arabian kingdoms rose to prominence. Qataban controlled the frankincense-producing regions. Hadramaut dominated the eastern valleys, while Himyar eventually unified much of Yemen under its rule. These kingdoms developed distinct identities while sharing a common South Arabian cultural foundation: sophisticated irrigation, literate administration, and mercantile economies. The zenith of pre-Islamic South Arabian civilization came with the Himyarite kingdom, which by the 3rd century CE had absorbed its rivals to create a unified state controlling the entire southwestern peninsula. Himyar's greatest king, Du Nuwas, made a fateful religious choice that would alter the region's history, converting to Judaism and making it the kingdom's official faith. This religious shift provoked intervention from Christian Abyssinia across the Red Sea. Abyssinian forces overthrew Du Nuwas and established their own client kingdom in Yemen. The displaced Himyarite aristocracy sought Persian assistance, drawing the Sassanid Empire into Arabian affairs. By the early 7th century, Yemen had become a Persian province, one example of how the great powers of the age competed for influence over the strategic peninsula. Far to the north, along the desert frontier with Byzantium, the Nabatean kingdom carved a different path to prosperity. These former nomads settled in the rugged mountains of modern Jordan, developing sophisticated water harvesting techniques that transformed arid landscapes. Their capital at Petra, the Rose City, hewn directly from rose-colored sandstone cliffs, stands as one of antiquity's architectural wonders. The Nabateans controlled the northern spice routes, serving as middlemen between Arabia and the Mediterranean. Their merchants traveled widely, adopting elements of Hellenistic culture while maintaining their Arabian identity. Their distinctive script eventually evolved into the Arabic alphabet used today. Though absorbed into the Roman Empire by 106 CE, Nabatean cultural and commercial influence continued for centuries. On Arabia's northeastern frontier, the kingdom of Lihian controlled the oasis of Al-Ula from the 6th century BCE. Libyanic inscriptions carved into sandstone cliffs record a settled society with a king, temples, and economic specialization. Their strategic location on the incense route brought prosperity until their absorption by the expanding Nabatean state. The eastern Arabian coast remained oriented toward maritime trade with Mesopotamia, Persia, and India. The island of Failaka, in modern Kuwait, featured a Greek temple from Alexander's era. Gera, near present-day Hofuf, grew wealthy trading pearls and aromatics. Archaeological excavations at Taj suggest this may be the legendary city of Gera, described by classical geographers, a wealthy entrepot where Arabian and Mesopotamian cultures blended. These settled kingdoms existed in complex relationship with the nomadic tribes of Central Arabia. Trade routes required cooperation. Caravans needed prot. Daily life in pre-Islamic Arabia varied dramatically across geographical and social divides, yet shared fundamental rhythms dictated by climate, tradition, and survival necessities. To understand this vanished world, we must step into settlements both humble and grand, following their inhabitants through the cycles of their days. Dawn breaks over a Bedouin encampment. Women rise first, rekindling fires from carefully preserved embers. They prepare a simple breakfast of dates and camel milk, while men gather their herds for the day's grazing. Tents of black goat hair, designed to provide shade in scorching heat and shed water during rare rainstorms, form a circle oriented to catch prevailing winds. Within each tent, a divider separates the women's quarters from the men's reception area, where guests are entertained. Children begin their education not in formal schools, but through practical apprenticeship. Boys follow their fathers and uncles, learning to track animals, find water, and navigate by stars. Girls work alongside their mothers, mastering the intricate skills of textile production, from shearing and spinning to weaving patterns that identify their specific tribe. Oral transmission of knowledge ensures survival skills, tribal histories, and cultural values pass from generation to generation. In agricultural settlements, the day's pattern follows irrigation schedules. Date palm gardens require constant attention, pollination in spring, protection from pests in summer, careful harvesting in autumn. Families work communally to maintain the complex foliage irrigation channels that distribute precious water fairly among community members. Seasons dictate labor intensity, creating agricultural festivals that mark key points in the annual cycle. For urban dwellers in trading centers like Mecca or Yathrib, the day revolves around commercial activities. Merchants open their stalls in bustling souks where goods from across the known world exchange hands. Money changers assess foreign coins. Scribes record transactions for illiterate traders, and caravanserai host merchants from distant lands. Women of wealthy families might manage household businesses, invest in trade ventures, or own property in their own right. Clothing reflected both practical needs and social status. The basic garment for men was the izar, a wrapped cloth covering the lower body, paired with a rida draped over the shoulders. Women wore long shifts with head coverings of varying elaboration depending on region and status. The wealthy displayed their position through imported silk trimming, jewelry of silver and carnelian, and perfumes created from costly aromatics. Food varied by region and lifestyle. Bedouin diets centered on dairy products, especially camel milk, which could be fresh, fermented, or dried into portable provisions. Dates provided essential sugars, while bread came from barley or occasionally wheat. Meat was typically reserved for special occasions or guests. In settled areas, cuisine grew more elaborate, incorporating vegetables, fruits, and imported spices. Coffee had not yet reached Arabia. Instead, social gatherings featured milk drinks or date-based beverages. The rhythm of life slowed during the midday heat. Settlements fell quiet as people sought shade for the hours of Kailula, the traditional afternoon rest. As temperatures cooled toward evening, social life resumed with renewed energy. This was the time for visiting, for councils, for storytelling around fires. Family structure followed patrilineal patterns, with descent traced through male ancestors. Marriages served as alliances between families or clans, often arranged to strengthen social bonds rather than for romantic considerations. While Islam would later limit men to 4 wives, pre-Islamic custom allowed unlimited polygamy for those who could afford it. Divorce was easily obtained by men simply declaring their intent, though women retained rights to their personal property. Children represented the future of the lineage, with sons particularly prized for their ability to defend family honor and continue the bloodline. Names often reflected parental aspirations: Harb, war; Sakr, rock; or Layla, night, each carrying symbolic meaning within tribal culture. Among certain tribes, the birth of a son called for sacrificing a sheep in celebration and distributing the meat to neighbors. Entertainment centered on oral traditions. Professional storytellers kept alive tales of tribal heroism, legendary battles, and ancestral glory. Music from simple reed instruments, drums, and stringed rebabs accompanied songs celebrating tribal virtues or lamenting lost loves. Chess-like board games tested strategic thinking, while children played with simple toys fashioned from palm fronds, pebbles, and camel bone. The night brought relief from heat, but introduced new dangers. Extended families gathered around fires that kept wild animals at bay, while, by the late 6th century, Arabia stood at a crossroads. Ancient kingdoms had fallen. Traditional power structures were strained. Religious questioning intensified. Environmental pressures mounted. And beyond the peninsula's borders, two weary empires, Byzantine and Sassanid Persia, exhausted themselves in seemingly endless conflict, creating a power vacuum that would have profound consequences. The Marib Dam's final catastrophic failure around 575 CE symbolized the end of an era. South Arabian irrigation civilization, built on centuries of water management expertise, could no longer sustain itself. Population shifts followed ecological collapse, with tribal groups migrating northward, intensifying competition for resources in Central Arabia. Mecca had risen to unprecedented importance. The Quraysh tribe, through shrewd diplomacy and commercial acumen, transformed what had been a minor sanctuary into the peninsula's most important religious and trading center. Their system of commercial alliances, the Ilaf, created a network of mutual protection that facilitated trade despite the absence of centralized authority. Yet beneath this apparent success lay growing contradictions. Wealth concentrated in fewer hands. Traditional tribal values emphasizing collective welfare clashed with emerging mercantile individualism. The gap between rich and poor widened, creating social tensions that found expression in poetry lamenting the loss of simpler times. Religious currents reflected these broader social changes. While polytheism remained dominant, it increasingly appeared inadequate to many thoughtful observers. Monotheistic communities, Jewish and Christian, offered more coherent theological systems and ethical frameworks that addressed changing social realities. The Hanifs, seeking authentic spiritual expression outside established traditions, represented a distinctly Arabian spiritual searching. Beyond Arabia's borders, the Byzantine-Persian War entered its final, devastating phase. When Persian forces captured Jerusalem in 614 CE, seizing the true cross, the conflict took on apocalyptic dimensions for many Christians. These distant political events had direct economic consequences for Arabia as trade routes shifted and diplomatic alliances realigned. This was the world that awaited transformation, a world of ancient traditions and new questions, of established power structures beginning to fracture, of spiritual yearning amid material change. In the quiet hills above Mecca, a merchant from the Quraysh tribe was about to experience revelations that would reshape not just Arabia, but human history itself. The stage was set. The actors were in place, and in the darkness before dawn, a new chapter in the human story was about to begin,